Mac Power Users, episode 691, Workflows with David Rosenthal. Hello and welcome back to Mac Power Users. My name is Stephen Hackett. I'm joined as always by my friend and yours, Mr. David Sparks. Hey, David.
Hey, Stephen. I am particularly happy that you are back with us this week. You had quite a run for the last few weeks.
Yeah, if you listen to Connected or follow me online, you may have seen I was in a pretty serious car accident 2 weeks ago, but I came out with minor injuries and well on the road to being mended. So thank you all. I got a lot of nice notes from listeners and emails and tweets and stuff. So thank you all. And it is good to be back at work in one piece.
Yeah, when you sent me a picture of what happened to your truck, it was pretty scary, man.
I don't recommend being upside down in a vehicle. Let's just say that.
Yeah. But you did, in fairness, you did completely destroy trash can. That trash can lost the fight.
I did run over this family's garbage cart accidentally on my way to flipping over. And my wife, who is a saint, went on the city website and ordered them a replacement. And I drove by there a couple days ago, and the replacement is there. So everything is all squared away on the trash can front.
All right. Well, I am glad that you're safe and glad that you're back and looking forward to the show. We've got a guest we've really been looking forward to. Before we do on More Power Users today, and that is the paid-for version of the Mac Power Users where you get the ad-free version with the additional content. Steve and I will be talking about our thoughts as we're a month away from WWDC. But that's coming a little later. First, I want to introduce you to our guest. Welcome to the Mac Power Users, David Rosenthal.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, David, somebody sent me a link of an interview you did with one of the music publications a while back, and I was watching it thinking, boy, this is a dream guest for the Mac Power Users. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself in more detail, but just to kind of set the stage, see how I did that.
Hey, that's good.
Yeah, David is a keyboardist, but also a Mac nerd extraordinaire. David, tell us what your job is.
Well, I have a lot of different jobs, but all of it, in one way or another, the Mac seems to infiltrate everything that I do. So, yeah, I do a lot of things. My biggest job right now certainly is musical director and keyboardist for Billy Joel. I've been with Billy for 30 years, and we are currently doing the monthly residency at Madison Square Garden. This week will be show number 90 in 90 months, 90 sellouts, that is, in a row. Interrupted, of course, by the pandemic, unfortunately. But then we continued it again afterwards. And it's been an amazing run there. We lifetime, it's something like 135 for Billy, of which I've done 115 of them with him, and I played there 2 other times with 2 other artists. So it's kind of surreal coming out of my mouth to say that I played Madison Square Garden 117 times, but that's my story, and it doesn't get old, and it's a pretty remarkable experience.
I was going to say, does that ever get like just another day at the office, or is it like magical every time?
No, it really never becomes routine because every show is a little different. We do different set lists. There's a lot of spontaneous moments in the shows. Sometimes we have guests. There's, no 2 shows come out the same. Of course, Billy's music is timeless, and I never get tired of that. But the show being different every time, it's really just a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, in addition to being the keyboardist, as I understand it, you do a lot of the musical, well, you said musical director, so you're setting up a lot of the technology, the music technology behind it, which is driven by and large by Apple.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep. Yeah, Apple plays a big role in everything I do. I'm using multiple computers on stage for main stage, a system and a B system with real-time redundancy, which we can talk a little bit more about that later in detail. Yeah, it's always been a part of what I do, and now basically it's the engine of my entire keyboard rig, which was unfathomable when I started out in this business back in 1981. It was just, who would have ever thought that it would come to this. My first tours that I did were pre-MIDI, and the newest thing that was coming out then was polyphony on synthesizers, and the ability to be able to save a patch on only the newest synthesizers was a brand new feature. So I toured in that level, and I've been doing this professionally since that time period, and it's really remarkable to think how far things have evolved
Yeah.
in ways that nobody could have foreseen.
Yeah, I always feel I'm fortunate. I'm in my mid 50s, and I was able to grow up with the original, computers that came out, and
Hmm.
I saw them when they only had 4K of memory. And I feel like you've kind of had a similar path with music, as technology inserted itself into music. You've actually seen the entire journey over the course of your career.
Totally. I mean, my first Mac was a Mac Plus with I think it had 1 meg of RAM, and yeah, it's remarkable how it's come. It had a floppy disk in those days, and it was just in the beginning when MIDI was being introduced to computers. And I was on tour at that time with Cyndi Lauper. This is the True Colors World Tour, 1986 to 87. And I picked up a Mac Plus because I heard that there were some interesting apps that were or applications that what could be used for music, which was like kind of head scratching at the time. How can I use computers in music? This is
Mhm.
really fascinating. But they were starting to come out with just some of the earliest synthesizer editors from opcode, so that you could have you can edit your DX7 and things like that. And the early days of sequencing, Vision was around, and company Passport had a sequencer called Master Tracks Pro, which I used. And yeah, it was just the early days, but I was fascinated by it, but not yet using it professionally. But what I did is I picked one up and I took it on tour with me. And I every night when I got into the hotel, I would be setting it up in my room, and I had all this extra time. And that's when I really sort of, got bitten by the bug of like, wow, this is really a cool way to do what I do already, but I can just get in deeper with it.
Mhm.
And over time, it just kept growing, and the computers get more powerful. But even in those days, I couldn't imagine that one day my entire keyboard rig would be running on Macintosh. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, talking about a Mac Plus to Stephen Hackett is like throwing red meat. I mean,
I'm a
yeah.
big vintage Mac fan. I was just thinking, I think the Mac Plus weighs like 16 pounds. I mean, I could see like lugging that around and getting it set up. And I'm sure the journey has been incredible to see how that's matured and really moved into areas that were just seemingly impossible. That is really cool to hear about.
Yeah, well, I mean, by today's standards, yes, I was lugging it around, but at that time, it was remarkable that I could have a computer that I could
Yeah.
even carry.
Yeah.
So so everything is relative.
Mhm.
So to me, that was remarkably portable, and all you had to do was plug in the keyboard and the mouse and the let's see if I'm testing my memory here. I think it was an Opcode Studio 2 MIDI interface. That was the first MIDI interface that I used, and it all fit in this little blue carry bag, and yeah, so it's and I took it on the tour bus with me, and yeah, so it didn't seem like I was lugging it then. I was thrilled to be
Yeah.
using it, but certainly by today's standards, it would be
Right.
lugging a
Yeah, it
whole lot of
wasn't the
stuff around.
size of a washing machine, right?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, let's back up a little bit more. How did you first get into music? I mean, you've talked about your career a little bit and how that started with the tech, but let's roll back the clock to a young David. Is this something you were interested in as long as you can remember? What is kind of that origin story?
Yeah, always. Music has always been forefront in my life. I started piano lessons when I was 7 and started playing in bands when I was like 12. And I got my first synthesizer when I was 14, I think. Yeah, I got bit by the bug early of the idea of keyboardists in rock bands, listening to Rick Wakeman and Keith Emerson, Chick Corea, and a lot of the keyboard players from that time period. Uriah Heep. I used to listen to Ken Hensley, and they all had B3 organs and they had synthesizers, mostly mini Moogs in those days. Although Rick Wakeman had a pretty big setup of some other things, and I was just fascinated right from the beginning. The first time I ever heard a synthesizer, I was going to a music camp when I was, I think, 14, and they played me a Tomita record. It was Pictures at an Exhibition, which is done on all synthesizer on a big Moog modular, one note at a time. And I was just like, wow, this is what I want to do. And I just became my passion to learn how to do that. And so I got my first synth, later that year and started learning about signal flow and how synthesizers work and all that stuff. And I was using it in bands right away. Of course, the computerized versions of that were a long way off. But I was fortunate to then, study synthesis along with audio recording and piano performance at Berkeley. That's where I was fortunate in those days to learn on patch cable synths. So, and early audio recording studios. So you really, had to learn signal flow. If you didn't have signal flow down, you didn't get a sound. You had to connect the oscillator to the filter, to the amplifier, and then everything you had to do had to be patched. And if you didn't do it right, you didn't get any sound at all. So you had to learn how it worked. You had to understand it. And what's really cool about that is that everything that happens today inside a computer, whether it's, a plugin or whatever software you're using, signal flow is signal flow. So the basics of signal flow that I learned all the way back then have just become, a really deeply ingrained part of everything I do. Granted, it looks totally different, and how you use it is different, and what you can do is so much more powerful. But under the hood, it's all just still the same thing.
Yeah, and I would imagine that growing up with that really gave you such an inherent understanding about it that the modern digital tools are much easier for you to manage and control.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was at the NAMM show last year. I live in Orange County, California, and the NAMM show happens here near Disneyland every year. And
I go every year.
Oh, well, next year I'll look for you. But I noticed that now those old style synthesizers with all the patch cables are coming back. There's several manufacturers making them again. And
that's true. Yeah.
And it's interesting to me. It's like, it reminds me of like how younger people like want to get into vinyl or whatever. Now the younger musicians want to kind of go back to the beginning with synthesizers, and you see them getting really into the patch cables and doing it the old way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And they sound amazing, and they're very powerful. For me personally, I am not willing to give up recallability. To me, that's everything of being able to, spend as much time as I want programming a sound, getting it dialed in exactly right, and then being able to recall it at the touch of a button. So, do the hardware synths sound better than plugins? Yeah, a little bit. But to me, it's not worth the trade-off for losing the recallability and the portability of it.
It's just like us older guys don't want LPs because we remember them. I remember when I was 12, I melted my Miles Davis record, and it broke my heart because I mowed a lot of lawns to pay for that record. And as you get older, like you're wiser. But I get it that younger folk want to kind of learn kind of the nuts and bolts of it, just like you did. And I think that's actually kind of cool. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't see you like going on the road with Billy Joel carrying 30 linear feet of cables to hook up your, hey, wait a second, Billy, I got to reprogram.
Yeah. Well, I did tour, many, many years with carrying a lot of synths and modules around. By the way, just on a side note, I cut a lot of lawns too when I was a kid to pay for my first synthesizer.
Oh, I bet.
Because when my parents thought, no, that's a toy. You don't really need that. And if you want it that bad, you pay for it. So, okay. Mm-hmm. So I went and cut lawns until I could buy my first synthesizer, which was a Roland SH-1000.
Well, we're of a similar age. I also was very into music as a kid, and I remember going to the music store the first time they set up the synthesizers and pressing a key and hearing a violin, and I was thinking, that is amazing. It was like earth-shattering to me. That was even before they really had a lot of different sounds. Anyway, see, this is why Steven's here. I'm not allowed to do these conversations. One other thing, Berkeley is a well-known, probably one of the premier music schools in the United States. So a lot of people I know went there for jazz, because that was known for that. But it is a big school for commercial music, Broadway. I know you've done some Broadway work too. So how were they back then with all the electronic music? I know they're super into it now, but was that like cutting edge when you were there?
Well, they were ahead of the curve even at that time. There really were no other schools doing that. Most of the other music schools in that time period when I went, 78 to 81, it was more traditional, mostly classical. Some offered jazz, but very few schools, if any, had synthesizers and recording studios and things like that. So when I went to go look at Berkeley, I was going to audition for Manhattan School of Music and go down that route. And then I went to go see Berkeley, and I was like, game over. I'm going here. And I canceled all my other auditions and everything. And that was it. I just Berkeley was the only choice for me.
You saw the toys and you said, I'm in.
Well, yeah, and I just saw that they had a contemporary feel to it, and that it was about, yes, they had they had great teachers there. I had some great classical teachers there, and learned orchestration and all kinds of things. But I also got the technological education that I wanted, and that was really important.
Yeah, and I just want to call out one thing I do a Jazz Friday post at Max Sparky frequently, and you had mentioned Chick Corea. For listeners who have never listened to Chick Corea, he is maybe one of the greatest keyboardists of all time, and I just want to put an asterisk there. Go listen to him on Apple Music, guys. He's amazing.
I'll second that.
And he recently left us last year.
Yeah, really sad. Yeah.
You've also done work on Broadway.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I worked on a couple of Broadway shows doing synth programming, and also was an associate musical supervisor on Moving Out, which was based on Billy's music. So that was kind of a way to put together a lot of the different knowledges that I've gained over the years. The second show that I did was Tale of Two Cities, and my role there was the original orchestration was for a full orchestra, but in Broadway, you only have a small pit with a small number of musicians. So I had to create a reduction of the score down to be played by lesser people, and then have all of the missing parts covered by two different keyboard players. So I had to write the book for them, or all the parts that they would do, and then set it up so that each player could just step on a advanced program button, which would be written in the score. All they didn't have to know anything about technology whatsoever. All they would just be reading the music, and then they would see press the button here, and that's all they had to do, and it would change to the next sound, and everything was set up. So that was really cool. Different uses of some of my different knowledges.
Yeah, and in addition to all that, David, you also compose your own music.
Yeah, I do a lot of things and run the gamut of everything. I've had my own band and written for a lot of different things. And I'm also an orchestrator, arranger, and a synthesizer programmer. I do that sometimes for other artists, even if I'm not the keyboard player in the band. I redesigned Bruce Springsteen's keyboard rigs for both of his keyboard players on the Wrecking Ball tour, and redesigned it and programmed everything up, and trained the keyboard techs. And so I've done that for a lot of different artists. And so I don't always have to necessarily be the performer, although I get what they need, because, I also do that job too. I know what it's like to be on stage, and I know what it's like to rely on technology. So, I'm able to build in all of those things into setting up a keyboard rig for somebody else.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure in that sort of situation, your experience and wealth of knowledge makes you a much better, consultant or someone helping out with a project than other people. I know before I did podcasting for a living, I spent some time as a consultant in the Apple world, and that experience is just something that when you bring to the table, it really sets you apart.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password. Go to onepassword.com/MPU to get 20% off. Did you know that 1Password is the best password solution for your business? With 1Password, you can take the guesswork out of logins, shadow IT, and infrastructure secrets, so you can keep your people safe and your business moving. 1Password makes it so much easier to simplify your security operations. You can get a comprehensive overview of your security posture, manage your team, generate reports, and even see who's traveling, all from one place. With 1Password for Business, you can monitor password health, potential breaches, and team usage from a unified Insights dashboard, and take action when you need to. And best of all, it solves all the pesky problems of passwords in your business. You can autofill and securely share logins. You can set up two-factor authentication codes, security questions, and much more. So the secure thing to do is always the easy thing to do. If you want even more granularity, they've got advanced protection that allows you to create custom password policies and sign-in rules and monitor access for events like sign-in attempts. I've heard from a bunch of MPU listeners that are using 1Password to run their business. If you've got a business, you should use it too. Just like we need 1Password to protect us as individuals and families, 1Password is also there for your business. To learn more, head over to onepassword.com/MPU today and check it out.
So let's talk about hardware for a little bit. I would love to just talk about the Mac Plus the rest of the time, but I've been told I'm not allowed to do that. We'll talk about it on the road in a little while. But when you're, sort of a typical day, what does your Apple gear look like? Let's start with the Mac, since that's the heart of this.
Well, I actually have multiple setups that I use, so I would have to talk about them individually. I mean, I use, a MacBook Pro for my office and to run all of my business on it.
Mhm.
That I take that pretty much everywhere whenever I go, wherever I go. But it's dedicated to that. And then my assistant has an iMac, and here in my studio, I have a trash can. Am I allowed to call it that?
Yeah.
Powering the studio with a Pro Tools system, and but then on stage for touring. I have two trash cans mounted in a rack next to each other. They're identical systems, both run main stage, and they run all the time in tandem, such that if either one of them were to lock up at any point in time, I can, with a foot switch, change all the outputs. So both computers are running all the time in tandem, but only one set of outputs are live at any given moment. So if something happens or something doesn't feel right, goes wrong, whatever, I can switch to the other one and just keep playing without seamlessly, while the other machine can restart or do whatever it needs to do.
All right. Now, let me interrupt there for a minute because I got it. How do you do that? What is the hardware that allows you to switch all the outputs on one pedal?
Right. So it's a radial SW8, which is basically an 8-channel AB box. And it has a remote foot switch. So I have all 8 of my outputs coming into one unit from one computer, through the ultralight audio interfaces that I'm using. So there's the A rig, as I call it. The outputs of that go into one side of the SW8, and the B rig, the second computer, goes into the other side of the SW8, and then the foot switch that I can control from stage. Only one set of outputs is live at any given moment. Yeah.
Have you ever had to use that under fire? I'm just kind of curious.
Well, yes. I mean, it doesn't happen often, especially, but in the early days of a new keyboard rig or a newly designed rig, until you get all the bugs worked out, sometimes you come across a little something that's weird in a patch or something, whatever, or sometimes it just gets a little squirrely, and then I switch to the other system and restart the first one. But over the course of a handful of gigs, all those things usually get worked out, and I rarely, if ever, have to do that now because I have a lot of shows under my belt using a system that I never change. It's really important if you're doing what I'm doing. My systems are they're frozen. I'm still using Catalina right now, and during the pandemic I switched from Yosemite. So I did a big leapfrog. I was using Yosemite long after it was completely nobody was using it anymore. But I had debugged my system. It worked perfectly, and basically I don't ever connect it to the internet. I don't use it for anything else. I don't check my email or any of that stuff. It's a dedicated musical instrument as far as I'm concerned, and both of them need to remain identical and unchanged. So right now, my Catalina system that I'm using with Mainstage, they are frozen, as I like to call it, because the two systems live in a truck, and I can never get to them. The only time I see my gear is at sound check on the day of a show, and there's minimal time just to make sure everything's working, basically, and then we do the show. So what I also have is, I have the A rig and B rig, as I call it, on that run in tandem live during the show. But here at home, I have a C rig that is identical to those. So if Billy wants to do a new song, or if I need to tweak something or work on some programs or whatever I want to do, dial in some extra sounds, whatever it is that I need, I can do that at home. I put the patches on a flash drive, and then when I get to sound check, I load them into the other system. So it's really, really imperative, since my gear basically lives in a truck all the time, to have an identical system here at home that I can program with if I need to.
Yeah. We haven't talked to many people using the 2013 Mac Pro. I think a lot of people look at that machine and consider it to be a bit of a flop, but here you're using them for a long time now, and it sounds like with great success. What are your thoughts on the trash can as someone who has had them at the center of so much of what you do?
Well, full disclosure here, I had to replace them all at one point because they
GPUs.
yeah, exactly. Yep. The GPU was there was a problem, an inherent problem that happened with age, and they started to rear that ugly head and do strange things. And I finally narrowed it down to that's what it was. So I replaced them all, which with virtually an identical machine except for the newer GPU. And and I've been running that now for probably about 2 years since the pandemic ended. So, I guess about 2 years or so, and they're pretty solid, but here again, I don't do anything else with these machines. That's it. They're set up to do exactly what I need them to do for the show, and that's it. And I don't update any of the plugins, even though I would love to have some of the newer things. I don't update the version of Mainstage. Nothing. It's just the system works. It's debugged, and it stays the way it is. Until some point in the future when I have a big block of time to upgrade everything and enough time to troubleshoot it, which rarely happens. I rarely get an opportunity like that. The only reason I had all this extra time to do the last upgrade that I did was because of the pandemic.
And so Apple's had this Apple Silicon kind of revolution, but that's not even on the radar for you because your machines are working already. And
well, it is. It is for me to use here in my studio. I mean, I like to stay current in my studio, and I have another system which I call a D-Rig, which is just a laptop and a sort of a more portable version of what I use for touring. So if I do a local gig or something like that or a session, I can just bring that, and that I have a little rack that just fits in the overhead compartment if I need to travel somewhere. It's so that is a system that I can take some more chances with and use some of the later greater stuff. But generally speaking, I like stuff and I need stuff to work. So even though it's really tempting to be the first guy on my block, with the coolest, newest, greatest stuff, it's not always practical to do that because ultimately you spend a lot of time debugging stuff. Some stuff doesn't work for a while. You have to wait for new versions to come out, and I just don't have time for all that. So I would rather use a system that's a year or two old, tried and true, and sort of bulletproofed and tested, and know that I can rely on it. That's really important to me.
Yeah, we had a guest on a couple of years ago who was a film scorer. He does the scoring for motion pictures, and he had a huge reliance on additional cards and like sound cards and all that processing stuff you do when you're scoring a film. But it doesn't sound like that is something you particularly need for what you do. It's more about the patches and the instruments.
Well, yeah, it's about but it's also about reliability because you're in a live performance setting, and my whole keyboard rig is running on a computer. It's the engine and it's the lifeblood of my whole keyboard system. It has to work. There's and that's why I have all these safety net provisions, which, by the way, I just wanted just a little side note. If both computers were to go down simultaneously, I have a second radial SW8 that can switch between whichever is my active main stage rig and the outputs of my Kurzweil controller keyboard, so that if both systems were to go down at the same time, I could then use my Kurzweil and play that for half a song or a song, whatever I need to do until the system gets back up and running. So I really have a lot of fail-safe setups because, I can't be up there on stage in front of 20, 30,000 people waiting for my computer to restart.
Yeah, no kidding. And, when they're on a truck together, you don't know, like maybe they're stored in conditions that are really hot or something, and suddenly they both fail. So you do need to have something working
exactly
when you get there.
Yeah. And on that note, also, I keep Time Machine backups of everything, and I keep a main Time Machine backup on the road with me, and a backup Time Machine separate drive that lives in a separate case, travels separately on the road. But I also have a home backup that just in case, like, God forbid, all of my gear disappears somehow.
Yeah.
Really, all the gear is replaceable. You just have to buy new gear, but it's my work that I want to protect. So, I have a backup that lives here at home as well, just in case something were to happen to everything that's traveling.
I know we're going to hear from some listeners and say, okay, you've got this rig. What is the MIDI controller or keyboard you're using with all of that?
Well, I use quite a few of them. I'm using a Kurzweil K2600 and I'm also using two Roland Phantom Phantom 8s as controllers, and I have also Roland PK5 MIDI bass pedals, and all of them are controllers. None of the outputs are going live. All the audio is and sound is coming completely out of the out of main stage. So they're all controllers on the stage, and they're all sent down into a MIDI Express XT by Motu for the MIDI interface, an 8x8 patcher, and then the audio interface is the ultralight AVBs.
David, do you use iPads or iPhones for any of this stuff?
I do use the iPads. I have 2 iPads in my keyboard rig, and I use them to change my patches. So basically, I use this program called Unreal Book, which you can put. It's meant to use for charts and things like that, and so that you can remote turn pages with a Bluetooth foot switch, which I can do. But one of the most powerful features of it is that you can assign a MIDI program change to the PDF when you load it, and then you can put them in an order of the set. So I need to be able to step through the order of the songs in the set list at any point in time. As we get to each song, to go from song to song. So since I don't need charts for everything, I obviously, doing this a long time, I have pretty much everything memorized. So what I do is I make a PDF of just the title of the song, and I put that in the set list, and I can attach to that a MIDI program change that I need that. So, and I put them in order of the set in one iPad so that I can step through the songs. But Billy will also, quite often change the order of the set or call out a song that's not in the set list. So on my other iPad, I have all of the songs that I have programmed in alphabetical order. So I can jump to anything really quickly if he calls something unexpectedly or just starts playing a different song, which does happen. He's very spontaneous, and I never want him to have to wait for me.
Yeah, and then at that point, you just change the programming of all the instrumentation with one tap.
Exactly.
I use that app, but I just use it to play standards. I don't use it to program MIDI. So when you call that, yeah.
Yeah, it does that, and it does it really well. And I also have some charts in there. If sometimes I write charts for the horn players or things like that, and I can keep them in there as well. So it's really, I used to carry around this giant book of all of my transcriptions and all of my notes and everything, and now it's all inside the iPad. So and I have 2 of them for that reason, but also for the reason that if one of them were to go down, then I have to be able to change my patches. So the other one, it functions as a backup too.
I mean, it's probably a lot of pressure for you when you think about it. Like, you can never have a technology failure during a performance. That's just not an option for you. So you've got to think through everything.
Yes, but technology errors happen. No matter how much you plan for it, or you can use the best equipment. You're still, you're still somewhat of, you have to have faith in the equipment that you use, but something still can happen. So when it does happen, it's really just a question of how you handle it. So a lot of times, something will happen that I planned for in advance, and I already have, I know what to do immediately. But sometimes you get thrown a loop or thrown a curveball, and that's why I'm very, very hyper focused during a gig. Not only because I'm playing, but more so because I'm kind of flying a plane, if you will. And everything has to work, and things do happen. Things do go wrong. It's live performance, and you have to handle it, and you have to have a clear head, and you have to figure out, how am I going to get through this next song and get back up and running as quick as possible, or what am I going to do to get through this? Now, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen. I mean, it's technology.
Can you share with us give us a story of like a time where you really had to use your technology jujitsu to get you out of a problem?
Well, and in one of the early iterations of the keyboard rig, I did have a situation where both computers went down at once. But again, I had prepared for this possibility by being able to switch to the outputs of the Kurzweil, and I restarted them both, and it came back pretty quickly. But I also have a Hammond organ on stage, which purposely does not have any MIDI cables attached to it. So
Sure.
If I have a complete MIDI meltdown and my whole rig blows up, I can play organ. So, no, that really hasn't happened, but the other situation where both computers crashed at the same time did happen, and it was actually when something like that happens, if two computers running the exact same things crash identically at the same time, then that's usually a replicable problem, which is a good thing, because then that means, okay, this definitely happened for a reason. I need to find out what the reason is and figure out a way to get it to crash. And then once I can figure out how to get it to crash, I can figure out how to remedy the problem. And that's what I did. And then I fixed that issue, and it never happened again.
I'm trying to imagine like your blood pressure at the moment you realize they're both going down at the same time.
Yeah, well, you gotta stay focused and stay present and just really have a clear head to handle something like that. If it happens. So it's really just a whole other dimension of performing, aside from me just being a musician, which, Billy has a lot of great music and there's a lot to remember on that side of things. But I have this whole other dimension that I'm dealing with at all times. And it's what I do. It's part of me. And it's what I do.
So you've talked a few times about debugging these setups, and share for us, how do you do that? I mean, do you just like set it up at home and try and break it, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I need to set up the system, start going through, go through patch after patch changes, play this, play that, go through this. And some of it is trial and error to get it to work optimally. For example, you want to make sure that when you're setting up a rig or a system like what I have, I make sure that there's multiple Thunderbolt buses on the trash cans. And nowadays, even still, they do it that way. So I try to have each of my different interfaces on a unique bus, and same with my streaming SSDs. I give them a dedicated Thunderbolt bus so that they're not sharing with anything else on the audio interface. Now, theoretically, they have the power to be able to handle both things, without a problem. But why take that chance? So there are separate buses available if you plug into the right ports. So a little bit of research, and I figured out where the port divisions are and how to keep things completely isolated from one another. And I find that just helps the overall stability of the system.
Yeah, David, this is really nerdy, and it's something a lot of people aren't aware of, that if you open up a Mac, those Thunderbolt ports, sometimes they're connected and sometimes they're not. And knowing the difference could make a big difference.
Exactly. Same thing with USB. Some of the USB buses are shared amongst different ports, and others are separate. And so all the information on every computer, if you just got to do a little bit of research, and you can find out how it's put together. And it's, to me, why wait till I have a problem? I just keep it separated, because it's just, I'm especially with the amount that I'm streaming from, because all of the virtual instruments that I'm using, I absolutely want to make sure that I have a dedicated bus for that, and a Thunderbolt bus too, not USB.
And we've been talking about, connecting it directly to the instruments, but you also mentioned you've got SSDs and maybe even other like Thunderbolt boxes. I mean, there's so many points of failure. Every point of failure that you introduce is another risk for you. So you must spend a bunch of time like figuring all that out too.
Absolutely, yeah, and but ultimately, it's like you're putting together a system, and the system all has individual components, but they all work together. And sometimes it's just plain trial and error. You have a problem, and you got to try something different, and this one is not talking to that one the way I need it to, and sometimes you just have to put it together like that. But ultimately, the goal is to find a system that works and lock it in, and then I don't change anything. And I also carry spares, so like you mentioned, the Thunderbolt docks and those types of things. I have spares of those should they go down, but that's not something that I really could change during a show. But
yeah. Do you have a trusted vendor for those docks? I mean, a lot of users really struggle to find one that they like.
Well, I use OWC, Other World Computing. They make great stuff. The Thunder Bay Mini is what I use on all of my systems, because you can load four separate SSDs into it, and it works over Thunderbolt, and it works really great. And I also use their SSDs; they make great stuff.
Yeah, both Steven and I also use OWC. That's a good affirmation for me.
I can see two of their cases right now behind my computer.
No, they make great hubs, and they have quite a lot of great products. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This episode of Mac Power Users is brought to you by NetSuite. Being a business owner or working closely with a business owner means knowing your numbers. If your business earns millions or maybe even tens of millions of dollars in revenue, stop what you're doing and take a listen. Because NetSuite by Oracle has just rolled out their best offer. NetSuite gives you the visibility and control you need to make better decisions faster. And for the first time in NetSuite's 22 years as the #1 cloud financial system, you can defer payments on a full NetSuite implementation for 6 months. That's no payment and no interest for 6 months. And you can take advantage of this special financing offer today. So why is NetSuite #1 anyway? Well, they give your business everything you need in real time, all in one place to reduce manual processes, boost efficiency, build forecasts, increase productivity across every department. That's really where this comes to shine, where you can bring these things together across various parts of your business, having all the information you need in one place. That makes your decision making much easier. I know as a business owner that it makes a real difference. When I'm making a decision with Mike, we need all the information available. The NetSuite offer is extraordinary. So join the 33,000 companies who are already using NetSuite. They've gained visibility and control over their financials, inventory, HR, e-commerce, and more. So if you've been sizing up NetSuite to make the switch, then you know this deal is unprecedented. No interest, no payments. Take advantage of this special offer by going to netsuite.com/MPU. That's NetSuite, NETSUITE, netsuite.com/MPU. There you can get the visibility and control you need to weather any storm. Our thanks to NetSuite for their support of the show and Relay FM.
So, David, you're on the road a lot.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our listeners also are on the road for various things. Share us some of your favorite tech tips just when you're getting on the road to, kind of hold all this stuff together.
Well, I think, if you're a keyboard player or if you're any musician who's relying on technology, as I do, you really got to spend time ahead of time basically trying to make it fail. You can't assume that just because it's working at home that you're going to take it everywhere and it's going to work all the time. You got to try, odd combinations of patch changes, flipping through the patches really quickly, jumping from song to song, do a cold restart in case you had to do that. Does everything come back up to a perfect starting point? All these different types of things that you have to try to do in when you're home programming or in rehearsal settings before you get in front of an audience so that you can try to be prepared for any situation that might arise. But as much as you do that, nobody can possibly prepare for everything. Mm-hmm. So the next most important thing to do is to just really have a good, deep understanding of your equipment that you're using, such that if you do have an unexpected problem, that you can, think through it logically and go, okay, well, let's see, this piece is working, that's connected to that, the problem here, okay, and then you just really quickly you have to troubleshoot, with an understanding of the signal flow to isolate where the problem is, and then you figure out, okay, it's either this cable or that device or that cable, and I can do that pretty quickly in my head because I designed my system and I know exactly how the whole thing is put together better than anybody else. So when there is a problem, I'm very quick to troubleshoot it.
Now, you told us you've got the 2 trash cans, that travel with you.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a bit about your like cables and drive backups and all that stuff. How many extras and spares do you bring with you with that kind of gear?
Well, I have spare cables for everything, at least 1 or preferably 2 spare cables for every cable that exists in the rig that's ready to use should I need it. I have, backup keyboards because they're controllers, but nonetheless, if one were to go down, I want to replace it with something identical right away. So I carry spares of those. And I carry spares of pretty much all of the devices, like I mentioned earlier, the Thunderbolt docks, the audio interfaces, the MIDI interfaces. Pretty much everything I carry a spare of. The gear doesn't really break that often, but it can, and you never know. But usually when things get damaged, it happens in travel. They bounce around too much in a truck or something happens. We have one of the best road crews, I should say the best road crew in the world, and they're so careful with the stuff, but still it bounces around a lot in a truck and things can happen. So usually when a piece of gear is not working, I know it in the afternoon at sound check, and then there's time to either fix it, get get it up and running again, or swap it out with a spare. But it doesn't happen that often.
It also sounds like a massive amount of like cabling to connect all of these things. Are you the guy who connects it, or does somebody else do that?
Well, I have a keyboard tech who sets up my gear every night, and he does a great job. But I'm the guy who connected it all initially. I made the whole system. I designed the system and made it all work. And then, but then once it looks a little bit messy when you first create a system. But then, my keyboard tech comes over and we build the system together and make it look all nice and neat. So, because even though I love cables, I don't want anyone to see any of my cables in a live performance. The keyboard rig should always look super clean and neat, and no, cables can be an eyesore. So that takes a little bit of effort to go through and really clean it up. But you can't do that until you've pretty much debugged the whole system in terms of how the system is going to operate.
Do you guys use a system? Like, how do you know, like, when you've got 30 cables, how do you know which one is which? You label them or use any?
Absolutely. Everything is labeled, and a lot of things are color coded too, because that way, you can do it even faster if things are, if you have a snake, things are also snaked together of like kinds. For example, if there's a MIDI snake coming from the stage, there might be, 6 or 8 MIDI cables, and they're all just in one loom. You don't want to sit there running multiple cables, one after another. You just drop a snake of a batch of cables, and then they come out and they fan out on the one end, and they're numbered, and a lot of times also color coded, because you can do it really quickly that way. And they just that way that you don't have to think too much when you do it. You just go boop 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 boop. And also every one of the cables are cut to length, so they go exactly to the length that they need to be. And that way, especially for the onstage part of things where the cables are seen, every cable is the exact length, and it goes right off to the side and goes down my keyboard stands, and it's velcroed to the keyboard stand, so everything looks nice and neat, and you don't really see the cables at all.
Yeah, with that much organization, do you bring that home too? Like, is your home set up like perfectly set up as well?
Well, it's not. I'm not performing here at home. I have a studio.
Yeah.
I try to keep my studio very neat, but it's a different workflow. It's a different creative process. Everything is different the way you function in the studio. The biggest difference is you don't have an audience. So, if there's some cables laying around here or there, it's okay as long as I get the job done of what I need to record.
Yeah. That makes me feel better about myself, because I was listening to you about your stage and looking at my cables here, thinking, man, I got some work to do.
Yeah, but I will say this: staying organized in the studio, even with all the cables, is really important too. Because if you're doing a session and you do have a problem, you don't want to be looking through a pile of spaghetti to find where the cable is that might be causing the issue. So it's important when you build the studio to do it neatly and do it organized in a way such that when you do have a problem, that you can find it quickly.
Mm-hmm. Really, the thing I'm struck by listening to you describe all of this is that your gear inside and out, right? You've designed these components to come together and do the job that you need them to do. I'm struck by sort of, even though we're talking about your world, almost how universal that is. Like, no matter what someone's doing with their Mac, right? If they're on stage in front of 30,000 people, or they're just running a small business at home, and everything in between, right? There's so much value in understanding what your gear is doing. Like, you've talked a lot about signal flow. And back 100 years ago, when I was doing my Mac Genius training, we had a lot of conversation about that in terms of not only does how a Mac works internally, right? Like, this is what the CPU does, and data goes on and off the disk through memory and all these things. But also, okay, if you're looking at a network issue, how do you troubleshoot that from the pole at the street with the Xfinity box hanging on it all the way down to somebody's local workstation? And I think that's a great thing for people to think about is looking at their setup sort of from that systematic standpoint and understanding how these different pieces really relate to each other. And I think it's, the scale's different for everybody, but I think it's an important troubleshooting step to understand where data and power and things go.
Absolutely. Well, signal flow is signal flow, and every device that you use has a path that the signal flows in, and it's really important to understand that. That doesn't mean that you have to know how to open up a computer and repair it. You don't. But you have to understand basic signal flow such that you can, you have a good working knowledge of how your system works. A good analogy is like the pilot of a plane. The pilot flies the plane; he doesn't fix it. he knows when something's wrong, and he knows how to get around an issue and make it work if need be, or use backup system. But most of them are not going to climb onto the plane and fix it. It's a different skill set for that. But the more you understand about your equipment, the better you'll be able to use it, and the more power you'll get out of it, because a lot of equipment now is just so incredibly powerful these days, and a lot of people don't take the time to really dive in and learn all the different things that every device can do. It's really, really remarkable.
You've been at this for a long time. I mean, you were there at the beginning, in essence, of digital music. What do you see as the friction points today for the type of work you're doing? What are the parts that need to get better?
Let's see. I would love to see systems that load quicker. That systems are so powerful these days, and computers are so fast, but the apps are more and more demanding. So, for me to completely launch my whole keyboard system for everything to get loaded still takes, a couple of minutes. And that's an eternity if you have to redo it, if you have to do it during a show. So, instant on would be a great thing to have happen if that is ever possible. Having said that, computers start up so much faster nowadays than they did, 10, 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
So that it has come a long way in that regard. But it's hard to say what would be ideal next, because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I couldn't even conceive of what I'm doing with my keyboard rig now. But what I can tell you is whatever comes out, I'm gonna play around with it and find new ways to get sounds that I never got before, and new ways to do things to make it easier and more powerful and smaller too. So I'm always going to be, tinkering around with that type of stuff and looking for new things. I love it. It's a passion to stay on top of technology, and I find it a whole lot of fun. It's kind of a hobby as well.
Yeah, I do think that when you get to a point that you can move to Apple Silicon, you're going to see a much faster boot up. I mean, that's been the case universal. I mean, I'm sure you have some of those machines already, and they boot up so much faster than the old Intel machines did.
Right. And one of the other tricky things too is that, Apple changes their operating system so fast because they have, huge teams of people working on it. And so if you use a lot of third-party plugins or third-party apps, a lot of them are spending a lot of their time making things work from OS to OS, and that takes a lot of time away that they could be developing new ideas and creating new features, and that's a frustrating sort of bottleneck in technology. I see both sides of the coin on that story, but it's hopefully they'll find an equilibrium at some point with that, such that the smaller boutique companies will be in a position to be able to create more often and more effectively, more frequently rather, and not just be chasing their tails constantly trying to make their existing products work with every new operating system when it comes out.
Yeah, Steve and I have talked about this before. I'm a big fan of Apple switching the Mac to a 2-year upgrade cycle where, just every 2 years give us a new version of Mac OS. And that way, that not only gives the third-party developers time to work on their apps, it also gives Apple time to make their native apps and things better, because they've got the same problem. Like if they get 2 or 3 months to come up with new features, and then they spend the rest of their time getting it ready for release and then fixing it after it releases, and then they got another 2 or 3 months. Where if you made it a 2-year plan, they would have like a year to work on new stuff. And I think it would be a lot better.
I completely agree with that. I think that's a fantastic idea. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but but it really would be a great benefit to so many people to do that.
Yeah. I am hopeful that we're entering a slightly slower period. I mean, I don't think they're going to give up their annual release cycle, but the last 4 or 5 years, we've come through the 32 to 64-bit transition, which killed a bunch of old apps, and now we've gone from Intel to Apple Silicon, and that's going to take a while to wrap up. But I hope, looking forward, that we can enjoy some years of stability. I think some of the changes that the Mac has undergone over the last few years was obviously leading up to Apple Silicon, right? They didn't want to support 32-bit frameworks on Apple Silicon, so they got rid of that early. So, that version of the OS could be the bad guy and not the one that came on your new M1. But almost everyone we talk to who depends on a Mac professionally, like, we all share this opinion that it's just too fast, and it doesn't need to be. This platform is 22 years old. I mean, OS 10 came out in 2001. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we can take a breath. It's okay.
Right, right. Well, I mean, having said all that, and I agree completely with that, we're also on the verge of seeing AI enter our world in ways that none of us can yet predict. So who knows how that's going to change everything?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about asking you about that with respect to music composition and sound generation, but then I thought, well, I don't know. Well, tell me, is that something that's on your radar at this point? Are you starting to experiment with it?
Well, I'm not actually experimenting with it yet, but I'm very curious about it. I find the technology both fascinating and somewhat frightening. It's it's really remarkable what it can do, but used to the benefit of society, I think it's going to be amazing. But it's also kind of scary, some of the things that it could do. So. I don't know yet exactly how I'll be incorporating it into music and into what I do, but surely it's an exciting new technology, and I'm sure it's going to find its way into what I do, into all facets. Really, I think it's going to infiltrate all facets of society. I think it's a really big deal what's happening with that, and we're right on the cutting edge of it.
Yeah, and this seems to come up now almost every show. So I try not to turn this into the AI show, but my thought on this, and I'll keep saying it because I want people to keep hearing it, is you should not be afraid of this stuff. Just look to ways you can help you do your job better. Some people are going to abuse it, but a guy like you, I'm sure you'll be able to use it to help you, streamline the composition process or the sound generation. I think there's ways eventually that it'll be like an assistant to you.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I will be. That's what I will be looking to use it for. How can I be a better musician by using it? How can I make better music, create better sounds, or find newer, easier ways to do what I need to get to get done, and recording, performing, everything. So I look forward to that, and I am always embrace new technologies, and we're right on the edge of that now.
And just like with writing, like as a human, I'm interested in reading other things people write. I'm interested in listening to music other people make, not music made by a computer. And it's just a basic part of my humanness. So I think that there's a path for us, but you're right. It is an interesting time because this is all so new right now.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Indeed. Go to Indeed.com/MPU and join more than 3 million businesses worldwide using Indeed to hire great talent fast. What's a game where no one wins? The waiting game. When it comes to hiring, don't wait for great talent to find you. Find them first with Indeed. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, you can use their powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. Indeed streamlines hiring with powerful tools that find you matched candidates. With Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. According to Indeed data, US Indeed's hiring platform really is great because it gets you one step closer to the hire by immediately matching you with the quality candidates. Even better, Indeed is the only job site where you can only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements, making it an unbelievably powerful hiring platform, delivering 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined, according to TalentNest 2019. So join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/MPU. That offer is good for a limited time. So claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/MPU. That's INDEED.com/MPU. Terms and conditions apply. Do you need to hire? You need Indeed. And our thanks to Indeed for their support of the Mac Power Users and all of Relay FM.
I want to talk some about the software side as well. You've mentioned MainStage and some other software tools that you're using, and I want to know, kind of get a lay of the land from an expert of where these apps are. And I'm particularly interested in MainStage because that's not something that we talk about very often, and listeners may not have even come across this, even though it's from Apple. So could we start there?
Well, sure. So in a nutshell, MainStage is a live performance version of Logic. It basically has the same channel strips that Logic has, and the same audio paths, and you can use plugins in the same way that Logic can, but it doesn't record sequences like Logic does. It's meant to just set up sounds and map the sounds, up and down the keyboard as you need to, for the purpose of live performance, and then you can recall them at the touch of a button. So one of the things that I do, for example, is I divide my keyboard. Let's say I'm doing on any given song, I'll divide the keyboard up into different zones, and I'll have one zone where I'll play the verse sound that I need, and maybe the middle of the keyboard will be something that I play in the chorus, and the top part will be like a string sound or whatever. And every song I map it out such for whatever I need for that particular song. And then MainStage can recall that instantaneously, and each zone can have whatever sounds I assign to it using different plugins and whatnot. So it's very powerful. But MainStage also can function for guitar players and people using other instruments. That you can use pedal boards and things like that. It really can control any number of things in a live performance setting. So it's really a very powerful app.
And I would add to it, so I'm a MainStage user as well, but not nearly at the scope that David is. I'm a guy who fiddles around at home. I have a MIDI sax and I have a MIDI controller keyboard, and I use MainStage because it's just so easy. You can put the sounds into it. I don't need to do them on the fly. I'm not worried, about Billy Joel calling me out to play, the next song with him. But it's just so easy. You set it up on your Mac, and it is so far superior to anything I could afford to. They make little sound boxes you can connect to a MIDI device, and it'll generate sounds, but you have very little control over them, and they're very expensive. And if you already have a Mac, you just need the software and a MIDI interface, and now that can just be as simple as a cable with a MIDI port on one side, a USB on the other. And you can make beautiful sounds with your MIDI keyboards, and it's really fun. I think a lot of people who have any inclination with music and access to a MIDI instrument, you need to load this thing up on your Mac and just play with it.
Yeah, it's really great. And also people should play around with GarageBand. It comes with the Mac and it comes in the iPad as well. And that's sort of like a entry-level version of Logic being the pro version of it. But, it's so easy to use, and you can just experiment around with it and play with it, it's just, and come up with stuff. It's a great way to get exposed to this if you haven't tried it yet. And MainStage is very affordable. What's it, $29 or something like that?
Yeah, it's less than 100, I know, but I don't remember. I think I got it. It came with Logic, and I think I did buy it separately. Now that I think about it, but yeah, it's a great app. Have you ever? Has Apple ever reached out to you, or have you ever talked to Apple about the things you would like the software to do more? I would imagine someone that does the kind of work you do.
I'm in very close touch with the people who created MainStage, and I do. There's quite a number of features in MainStage that were my suggestion. Yes,
I love that. Yeah, it's good though. They're reaching out to the people that use it under fire and making it better that way. I always like to hear that.
It's great. I mean, and it works. It works for me too, because I get the features that I use, that I need. But a lot of times, these are features not just so unique to what I want to do. They're features that are real helpful for a lot of different people. And they've been very cool about welcoming my input.
So, is MainStage and Logic your primary audio recording and composing tools, or what else?
In my studio I use Pro Tools. Which is basically the same idea as Logic. They do the same types of things, and they're both, one's a BMW and one's a Mercedes, So I've been using Pro Tools forever, and I'm faster. I know my way around a Logic a little bit, but I've just been using Pro Tools for so long that I'm just more comfortable with that platform. But MainStage for live performance, and of course I use Finale for music notation. Right now I'm working on a huge project of correcting all of Billy's sheet music. I do a lot of things with notation. When I do orchestration, I write scores and things like that. I do that directly into Finale, and that's a whole nother world of software there that's exciting to use too.
Yeah, and that for folks listening, that's software that actually prints the music out. So,
Correct. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, so much of this stuff, I mean, again, you've seen over the course of your career, you probably remember as a kid going down and buying the scoring paper that has like 32 line staffs on it, and you'd be trying to write it all in and get someone to copy out the parts for the musicians. All that stuff now is digital.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, in the early days of that, I used to still do it on using pencil and paper, and then I would transfer it into the computer. And then, just all of a sudden I reached a point like, why am I still using paper and pencil? It's an unnecessary step. And so I really hardly ever use that. Obviously I haven't lost my ability to write, onto a score if I needed to do it. And sometimes it's really helpful to write things in. But generally speaking, I do it in the software all the time.
Have you played with any of the composition tools they have for iPad now, where you can use an Apple Pencil and score, or use it with a pencil?
I've seen some of that. I think it's really cool technology, but it's I prefer to create by playing and by coming
Sure.
up with stuff in my head and then writing it down, or either way. But I suppose you could stumble across some interesting things that way too. You never know where an inspiration could come from.
Yeah, it is. The creative tools are so amazing now. When I was a kid, I was trying to the big thing when I was a kid was a 4-track recorder. Like if you could get a 4-track recorder, but you had to like mow a lot of lawns to get one of those. So what we did was we took 2 tape recorders. I think they were like Sears recorders, and we would play the piano, record it, and then we'd play the recording and we'd play along with the recording and record onto another one. It was terrible. It's like, if I was a kid and GarageBand was out, boy, that would have been something.
Sure. Yeah, I used to do that too. I remember I had a Radio Shack little portable cassette player with a speaker built into it, and and then there was Craig, I think, made one that was a portable one, and I used to, or Panasonic, I don't remember exactly, but I ended up getting 2 of them, and I would hold the speaker of one of them over the mic to the other, and then play along with it and try to balance it out. So, but you know what? That is overdubbing, and that's how I learned how to overdub. And you're right. In the end, it didn't sound very good, but it worked, and you were able to hear back of what it sounds like to layer up a bunch of parts. And and again, I was fortunate to learn in recording studios where we had tape machines and locking up multiple 24-track machines and all that stuff and all the tricks that had to go along with that style of recording. And you had to know the console and the patch bays and everything. And now it all lives inside of Pro Tools or Logic or whatever digital audio workstation that you're using. It's really remarkable.
David, you'd had this amazing journey. Like you've kind of watched music, and digital music in particular, mature throughout your career. If someone's listening and they want to they're at the beginning of the journey and they think they want to start doing more digital music or just learn about this stuff, where would you recommend they go to start?
I would recommend just learning as much as you can in as many different areas as you can. Be a sponge, absorb everything, because when you get out there and you start your career, you can't script your career. You don't know how it's going to go. And you'd never know which of your skills you're going to need to draw on later in life. So while you're young and you have time to practice a lot and you have time to learn different technologies and learn all these different things, invest the time, because later in life it comes back in ways that you couldn't even conceive of. I'm so fortunate that I studied all these different technologies, not only technologies, but arranging and orchestrating and, performance and keyboard playing and all this other stuff. And, if I were to, throughout my career, only to have been a keyboard player, I would have had some really, lean times. But because I have this vast skill set, I'm able to do a lot of different types of jobs, and it's not always keyboard playing that I'm making a living from. So, and who could have predicted that? So, that's looking back, that's kind of what I'm really glad that I invested that time in to grow in those ways. And that's what I would recommend to young students as well.
And I would almost flip that too, say, if you are approaching retirement and you're getting a point where you have more free time, maybe your kids are grown, exploring instruments like GarageBand and some of the things David has been talking about is a great way to keep those synapses firing between your ears, because There's nothing wrong with an old guy or gal picking this thing up new now too. It's so much easier now than it ever was before.
Absolutely, yeah. The tools that are available to the average person are just incredible compared to what it used to take entire roomfuls of equipment and roomfuls of technicians to use it and to run it. And now it's so easy to use. Yeah, there's a bit of a learning curve if you're new to it, but it is attainable. It's not really that hard, and you dive in, play around with it, and most software nowadays is set up in ways that you can actually play around with it until you know what you're doing, and then over time you gain some knowledge, and then there's lots of great tutorials on YouTube, and there's just a vast amount of information out there that is so useful and helpful for learning new things these days. It's really amazing.
Yeah, I remember when I was in high school, I was in the state jazz band, and we wanted to learn that break that Charlie Parker did at the end of Night in Tunisia, and we could not figure it out. One of my buddies knew a guy in Italy that had it figured out, so we wrote a letter to Italy, and he sent us the transcription.
Wow.
You're one YouTube search away from that. Anything you want to learn. That so much of music, I felt like when I was young, was forbidden knowledge. You had to find a teacher to share it with you, and now it's just all out there, and anybody can, with a little time and patience, can pick up so much of it.
It's so true. Yeah, that's why all this technology is so exciting, because it brings it. It makes so many things available to everyday people. You don't have to be a dedicated professional to enjoy the power of making music using computers. It's really easy to and you can get some instant gratification too by just playing around with it a little bit, and you find yourself learning quickly.
And going back to that Mac Plus at the beginning of the episode, that's been Apple's gig the whole time, right? Bringing, in the old days, bringing the GUI, bringing simple tools to people who could afford an expensive Macintosh. But over the decades, I think that's where Apple's at its best, where they bring this, high technology, this great technology, these tools, and puts them in the hands of regular people or students or business owners, whoever it may be. And that's why this stuff is so exciting to all of us, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what got me on the Mac, because my first big computer purchase was an Atari ST, and David will remember that one because it had built-in MIDI ports. But the software was garbage, and it didn't work, And then, I got used to a Mac, and you have to buy a separate interface for your MIDI. But I really feel like the Mac has always been a platform that lets you create and doesn't require you to spend all your time defragging your drives and running the computer. It lets you create, and David's career is certainly an example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that completely. It's the Mac and all the peripherals that surround it and everything about the Mac throughout the years has been such a big part of what I do. And getting back to what I said earlier, this is something that didn't even exist when I was a student. So who could have conceived of having a personal computer that you can carry around with you with an entire keyboard rig in it? We couldn't even conceive of something like that when I was a student and learning. But yet, sure. I learned signal flow. I learned how these things work and how they function, and all of that knowledge applies to what I'm doing today, even with all of this sophisticated technology. Under the hood, it's all the same concepts.
This episode of MPU is brought to you by Fast Growing Trees. Breathe some life into your own backyard with fastgrowingtrees.com this spring. From shade to fresh fruit to privacy and natural beauty, let fastgrowingtrees.com help you plant your dream garden with their expert advice and fast, reliable shipping. FastGrowingTree.com's plant experts curate thousands of easy-to-grow plant, shrub, and tree varieties for your unique climate. Lemons to evergreens and everything in between is available. A lot of us want nice greenery around our homes, but it can be hard to know which plants will do best. Well, you don't have to worry about that because you get customized recommendations based on your specific needs. And their plant experts are always available to help you keep your plants growing healthy through the season and beyond. So there's no more waiting in long lines and hauling heavy plants around. You order online and your plants arrive at your door in just a few days. At the beginning of the year, we had a tree cut down on our property, and what used to get shade is now in full sun, and we didn't really know what to do. So we went to Fast Growing Trees, picked out a few plants, answered their form on the website. So you tell it the sort of climate information and specific information about where you want to plant. And it gave us some great recommendations. We've been really happy with the plants we've gotten from them. And with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, we know everything is going to look great. So join over the 1.5 million happy Fast Growing Trees customers. Go to fastgrowingtrees.com/MPU and get 15% off your entire order. That's 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com/MPU. Our thanks to Fast Growing Trees for the support of the show and Relay FM.
David, we always like to end up the show just talking about a few of the guests' favorite apps and services. You've been using a Mac for a long time. Are there any little apps or services that bring you joy and delight?
Joy and delight comes from things that work reliably.
Okay, that would make sense. Yeah,
I love that.
But there are a lot of things that I use. I mean, in any given day, I'm using, on the music side of things, I could be using MainStage, I could be using Pro Tools, I could be using Finale for notation, I could be using some of the many synth plugins that I use for sounds. And that's just on the music side of thing. Of course, I use iPads for what I'm doing to change my programs on stage to look up things on the internet or do whatever I need to do during the day, learn stuff, watch tutorials as we talked about earlier. And then on the other side of things, I have my on in my office, I'm always running Microsoft Office. I'm running Quicken. I'm using Zoom. We're using Zoom to communicate right now. There's all these great apps and different tools out there. It's really fascinating. And so I always try to talk to other power users and find out how they do things. Sometimes you pick up ideas and come across something that you hadn't thought of, and you get turned on to something new, and that's fun. But computers are just it's just a part of the everyday thing. And of course, where would we be without our phones? I mean, it's the power of the phone is remarkable, and to the point now where it's like if I had a choice between losing my phone or losing my wallet, I could if I lost my wallet, I could use my phone to replace everything really quickly. Yeah. The phone is such an invaluable tool, and it's not only for work things and work related and keeping up with news and all things like that, but it's also an enjoyable thing, and keeping in touch with people through social media, texting, whatever. All these things have infiltrated into our everyday life such that it's hard to imagine what life was like without it.
Yeah, if Apple gets its way, one day your phone will be your wallet. That's what they're working on.
Well, it's all already kind of happening. Yes, that's very true. Yeah.
I was thinking, with a guy like you must be so busy, like you're doing tour dates, so you're on the road a lot, and then you also have contract work and other stuff you're doing. How do you manage your calendar?
My calendar is pretty full, but I somehow find time to get everything done, although never as much as I would like to do. There's always projects that I'm anxious to do and have to get put off when there's things that get that need priority on my time. So it's always a bit of a juggling act. But, I love what I do. So, when you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. So it's my work is my hobby as well. And, it's, I get up every day looking forward to whatever is on my plate for that day. There's always something cool to learn, something new to do. And, and I still look forward to every performance that we do. It hasn't gotten old, and I still really, really enjoy every show.
All right, last question. What does it feel like to be there on stage playing with 30,000 people screaming in delight? It must be something else.
It's pretty awesome. And it gives you an adrenaline rush such that if they could ever figure out a way how to put that in a vial, it'd probably be the most popular drug of all time. But it's just a great feeling to be up there and to be performing and doing what I love to do and what I'm so comfortable doing, and seeing how the people respond to it, particularly with Billy Joel's music. His music lights up people's faces in a way that I've never seen with any other concert that I've been to or played or anything like that. It's just there's something really unique about his music, and it's really just a great experience. And I always try to make sure that I never take it for granted. At every gig that I do, I try to take one moment and sort of take a mental snapshot of the whole scene of things and sort of, write it to disk in my brain, if you will, because you never know when it's going to be the last time that you get to do that. And so I'm very conscious of how fortunate I am to have been able to perform all of these years and be a full-time musician through my whole life. And I'm very grateful for that and for all the opportunities that I've had. And I never take it for granted. So I always make sure that I appreciate it.
Well, we're very grateful that you took the time to talk with us today. David had emailed me, gang, to say, well, how geeky do you want me to get? And I said, take off all the stops. Just bring it. And you did. And we really appreciate it. Gang, you can find David at davidrosenthal.com, and he has an excellent Instagram. His Instagram, I would recommend checking that out. We've got some YouTube videos interviews you had done showing how you set up your rig on the road. So if people want to go deeper on that, we're going to put some links for that in. Is there anywhere else people should go to check you out, David?
Yeah, I don't know. You pretty much covered the gamut of it. There's a lot of things floating around, YouTube videos on the internet. A lot of it's on my website, which you mentioned. And I guess there's a wiki page as well. Yeah, there's lots of stuff out there floating around. So check it out. Whatever you see.
I love on your website, because I sent you the initial email inquiry about guesting on the show, and the website says, look, you can email me, but do not ask me for tickets to a Billy Joel concert.
You'd be surprised how many people do it anyway. So yeah, I just try to cut down, it's hard to answer all the emails that I get, but I do try to read them. And, but yeah, it's frustrating. So I try to, when you get emails like that, and so I try to just sort of filter it out a little bit.
Oh yeah. I love it. I love the idea that you put the constraint right there up front. So don't get any mistake here, gang. And frankly, I need to do that with some of my email accounts as well. But either way, it's really great having you on. We really enjoyed it. Thanks again for joining us, and good luck with everything, man.
Great, thanks so much, guys. It's been a whole lot of fun, and thanks for having me.
We are the Mac Power Users. You can find us at relay.fm/MPU. Thank you to our sponsors today: 1Password, NetSuite, Indeed, and Fast Growing Trees. And we'll see you next time.